Hi, it's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. I want to get that reflection out of my eye. I just got to stand somewhere. Emil Amok to you. This is Emil Amok's Takeout. My takes on all things considerable. Oh, why not? I mean, I've been a newsman, a talk show host, a columnist, a print journalist, a web journalist. I I live by the news. We call this the micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAXs because I talk about us like we matter. I talk about Asian American Pacific Islanders or Asian American X's. Are you Asian American Hmong? That would be an AAH, an Asian American Cambodian, AAC, AACA, Cambodian, CA, Asian American Chinese, AACH, and it's like we're in Hanukkah. It works. An joke. Happy Hanukkah to those of you who celebrate. You don't have to be any of those. You can just be an ALL and all the rest of you. Because I do the show in English, I talk about things that are happening here in the U.S., things that are happening in the world that affect us. That is no different today. Oh my goodness, there is so much stuff going on today. I mean, between abortion rights and Michigan and Omicron, that's an Irish version, Omicron, like O'Shaughnessy, O'Toole, Omicron. No, look, I joke because we try to make the news somewhat entertaining, but I'm a humorist, not a comedian. Oh, I do stand up. I tell stories sometimes, but I'm more a serious person talking about our issues. And we have a lot of issues. I mean, we have shared things to talk about, like guns. All right, this Michigan thing. We're back in the courtroom. I was trying to figure out, well, do I want to get the Holmes case and the Theranos, or do I want to look into Ghislaine Maxwell, or do I want to look into Jesse Smollett? I mean, those are cases that are like out and about that we can do in TV law school. I mean, that's where people know about the law. We know about the law from the journalists who cover the legal things on TV or the news that come out of legal cases. And so, we're back in the courtroom with the Michigan high school shooter. And we got the prosecutor, we're in the court with they were doing it in Zoom, and they had the parents. The Crumley family. They finally identified the shooter, Ethan Crumley, 15. And you could see him. He was he looked like he was in some kind of straitjacket or something, or some kind of body armor, some kind of restraint. And to see him, and to see his attorney, he looked like he had a juvenile attorney, an African-American female, and now he's tried as an adult, so now he has a big boy attorney, because he's going to get a big boy treatment here for now killing 4 people, accused of killing 4. Let's not convict him yet. Ethan Crumley, 15, could serve the rest of his life behind bars. A fourth died today. And then there's the other people who were injured, some still in the hospital. And so, you take a story like that, and Asian Americans, we are not immune to people getting shot and killed in these kind of public settings. We're not immune to gun violence. And those of you who followed my stories on the ALDEF blog, aaldef.org/blog, my column, which started in Asian Week years ago in San Francisco, and now on the side of ALDEF, the New York City-based civil rights organization for all Asian Americans, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. My column has been there about 11 years now. And you know that when my When my cousin was shot in 2014, I experienced gun violence. And you know what happened? They got the murderer, case solved, but they let him go. The DA's office let him go because the law in California says that if an intruder comes through the threshold, you have the right to kill that person. If you are in your home, your domicile, it's the castle doctrine. And it's the basis of that merger of homicide and self-defense. It's justifiable to shoot someone crossing the threshold if you perceive them to be an intruder. My cousin went into what was like a similar apartment in a building where everything looks the same. He was drunk. He goes into an apartment thinking it's his. He opens the door thinking he'll just sort of crash into his sofa, into his bed. He gets shot instead. They got him. They got the killer. They held him 3 days and said, we can't prosecute this guy. But you can bet if my cousin was a rich, famous person, there would have been a case. But because it was one poor guy being shot by another poor guy who was just fearful and had a gun, well, this was something that was not a big deal to anyone except my family. So I look at shooting deaths. I look at the big shooting cases, like the ones at schools. I mean, this is kind of like this is a thing. School shootings. Go back to Columbine. Go back to Parkland. Go back to on and on and on. We have school shootings in America. That's what our democracy gives us. And it's a shame. Well, why do we have them? I mean, I'm just thinking, to bring it back to the basic point, we have these because we live in a world of fear. We don't live in a world of love. We live in a world of fear. And when you live in a world of fear, out comes the gun. Forget the Second Amendment, and you're shooting first, asking questions later. I mean, my cousin would still be alive today if that had happened. If the shooter was not living in a world of fear and instead living in a world of love, and someone comes through the door and the guy just said, hey, what are you doing, guy? But no, he took out his gun, shot him, and it was justified. No murder charge. And I mentioned this because my cousin's birthday was on the 27th. He would have been 34 years old. He died when he was 27, 7 years ago. He was killed in May. I try not to think about it too much, but these dates come up, the anniversaries, and if you're Filipino, you go to the cemetery, you pay your respects, or you just say a prayer. You go on Facebook now, right? And you communicate with the others who just know that Stefan is very, 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 very dearly missed. And, he represented really that part of my family that was the next generation of Filipino Americans coming over from the Philippines after waiting in line for like 20, 25 years. Oh, his parents were waiting that long. He was born in line, and suddenly he was a citizen and allowed to come in. Or not a citizen, but was able to come in as a permanent resident or as a visa holder. Ultimately a permanent resident, ultimately a citizen, gunned down at 27. He'd still be alive today. So I take all these gun things seriously. Asian Americans aren't immune to the gun violence. So here's this 15-year-old in Oxford High in this town in Michigan that's like 91% white. I mean, you want to know the socioeconomics of Oxford, look it up. 91% white, fairly well-to-do. I mean, all the people who are on, I saw one black family who was interviewed. There was one victim, apparently. I saw them interviewed. Sad. Of course, it's not about race. It's just that this is a somewhat upper middle class or middle class. Well, Parkland was similar, although Parkland had a little, in Florida, had some diversity. And so Ethan Crumley, 15, apparently had some kind of, he was called into the school officials. He had some kind of behavioral things before the incident happened, and then allowed him to go on his merry way. His father had purchased a gun 4 days before, and that's why they're saying the parents may be brought up on charges. But Ethan had this issue. They didn't deal with it. Later on that day, he shoots up the school in the hallway. He didn't go into a classroom. And apparently, he wasn't targeting anyone. He was just shooting. 30 rounds, according to the news conferences today. 30 rounds, and they had another couple of 50-shot magazines that they've recovered. And he just had a 9mm, which is kind of interesting because in California, they put on the ban on the automatic weapons, the Ninth Circuit Court. We'll get to that a little later, maybe. But in California, the Ninth Circuit Court said, hey, put that ban back on. The assault ban could possibly come back on. So some people are trying to be responsible about gun laws, but my goodness, this guy had a 9mm handgun, which is fairly common. It still shoots a lot of bullets, and probably you can control things a little better with a 9mm handgun, especially if you're just firing at random. Now, I don't know what happened to this guy, Ethan Crumley. No one wants to say his name more than once, but I think what's important is, well, his parents have some responsibility, and Ethan Crumley is going to be tried not as a juvenile, but as an adult for what he did. And how could we have stopped this? I guess that's sort of the issue. I know you could debate Second Amendment. One thing came out in the press conference, Crumley wasn't bullied, or there didn't seem to be a record of him being bullied. But we have this 15-year-old who's unstable. I saw some people being interviewed today who said, and they echoed the same thing that I said. You got situations where you have members of Congress, like Paul Gosar, saying, oh, shoot Ocasio-Cortez, murder Ocasio-Cortez, threaten Joe Biden. Member of Congress. You have another member of Congress, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, saying a fellow congressperson, Ilhan Omar, is because, she had a backpack or something. She was a suicide bomber, a terrorist. These aren't just they're like mini hate crimes, thought crimes, rhetorical crimes, and they feed into the fear. And we all know why the politicians can't just get rid of this kind of sentiment. It's because they love to raise money with hate, and we just have to stop that. But when young, impressionable people, I'm talking about the kind that are playing video games, all the shoot 'em up video games, when they see their leaders acting this way, and when they're not emotionally mature, Well, when the leaders aren't emotionally mature, and when the people like these 15-year-olds aren't emotionally mature, then they see this and they say, well, that's the way we can act in America these days, apparently. In this world of hate and not this world of. Would it be nice if it were a world of love? So, the Michigan case, it's sad. I talked about it at greater length than I thought I would, just because it happens again. We talk about guns. This is show number 191, and we must have talked about 2 or 3 or 4 shootings since I've done this. There's an epidemic for you. I want to talk about the other epidemic. Oh, but before I talk about Omicron, I think about, we're going to meditate. Omicron. Because really, pausing helps. If you pause, it helps. They discovered it. It's in San Francisco. And a friend of mine said, well, San Francisco's number 1 again. And there must be people saying, oh, in San Francisco and Nancy Pelosi doesn't have it? Oh, it's got to be, that kind of rhetoric's coming. I hope not, but, it's probably because it's easy. And of course, there was the Chinese doctor, Dr. Chu from UCSF, who, after the San Francisco public health guy got up there and said, look, we've got this under control because we've got a good system set up where UCSF, they do their thing, and they, because of the genomic structure of the things that, the specimens, they're able to identify Omicron just like that. I mean, much easier, much faster. I think they said within 8 hours they were able to find. Most of the things that they find are the Delta variant, but Omicron, you run the numbers, boom. And then San Francisco also has, it's been pretty good in terms of distancing and masking and laws about congregation. One thing that I found very interesting is that the guy came on a plane, or a traveler, right? Came on a plane from South Africa, arrived on the 22nd, got tested on the 29th, was positive, mild symptoms. He was vaccinated, but not boosted. So Joe Biden was out there today, not in a different news conference in Washington, just saying, hey, look, the best thing we got is get vaccinated if you're not, get boosted if you're qualified, get your kids their vaccinations if they haven't. No need to panic. And there's no need to panic in San Francisco. But it's just the understanding that, wow, it didn't take long for Omicron to show up in the United States. And there's probably going to be other instances throughout the country. But they found it in San Francisco first, which is it's a little ironic because, as you know, today is World AIDS Day. And in one of the press conferences, there was Dr. Anthony Fauci. How do I know Dr. Anthony Fauci? I mean, I don't know him, but, when he was a younger man in San Francisco, well, he was still with NIH, I believe, CDC. But he was the point person on AIDS. And today, December 1st is World AIDS Day. And I recall it was this slow time of year in December where they talk about AIDS. It's coming, it's here, beware. No one took it really seriously when it first hit, 1981. Except there I was in San Francisco as a young reporter working on the weekends at the NBC affiliate. And of course I'm covering it. I talked to the poster child, the guy who was identified as the first person to have AIDS, and he talked about it, and I just remember doing one of the first stories on AIDS in the San Francisco Bay Area. And look now, years later. It wasn't until 84, 85 that NIH decided, hey, we're going to try to do something about getting a vaccine. And they haven't. After all these years, they just haven't. You know, and when you talk about Omicron, we talk about COVID. Look, COVID numbers are bad. We got like 800,000 deaths. We got, to varying degrees around the country, we have things happening. But if you vaccinate, if you booster, if you mask, we have a way of fighting it. And we're doing it. I mean, what were they telling us about AIDS back in the 80s? Safe sex. Some people, yes. Some people, no. Some people thought, oh, well, I'm not gay. I don't have to worry. Well, do you use needles? Do you use hypodermics? You know, the fact is, we were dealing with something we didn't know what was happening. And I just remember, if you lived through San Francisco in the 80s, there are people in your Rolodex who are no longer alive. Oh, there. Rolodexes aren't even alive. How about that? But there are people that you know from address books past that, oh, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. That's a reality. I've got some close friends. I've got some people I did business with. The guy sold me my first house. Good friend. Not my first hairdresser, but someone who told me that I would look good in a perm. Oh, that's not why he's dead, but you miss these people. They're your friends. And then people I interviewed. The first AIDS patient, Bobby Campbell, I'm sure he's gone. And then I know people who were gay during that time. Some of them are still alive. Some have died from other things, but what a scary time. And now here we are. The global statistics on AIDS, and I mention this because it's World AIDS Day, and these stats come from the UN. They're pretty staggering. Right now, we have 28.2 million people who get the antiretroviral therapy as of June 30th, 2020. 28.2 million. That's how many people are on these therapy drugs. Now, interesting, I did the PETA podcast today talking to a researcher, an animal researcher who works for PETA. And I asked her, I said, we don't have a virus. And I tried to get into why we don't have a virus. And I said, do you think that we don't have a virus because people are making more money not on the vaccine? Oh, excuse me. I said virus. I meant vaccine. Do you think that we don't have a vaccine today because we have more people interested in selling people the antiretroviral therapy drugs as opposed to giving people the vaccine they need? And she couldn't say, but you got to look at it. 28.2 million people now accessing antiretroviral therapy drugs. That's a lot of money into big pharma. Meanwhile, since 1984, they could have developed a vaccine to ward off AIDS to make sure no one ever gets it. And then you wouldn't have all those millions, the 28.2 million people on antiretroviral therapy spending, that's got to be millions of dollars into the pockets of big pharma. So if you listen to my PETA podcast, what I was getting at is, don't you think it's kind of a demotivating factor? You got these cocktails, these drug cocktails that you can give people so they can exist and they're making money, and it acts as a kind of demotivating factor in terms of getting a vaccine out. I don't think my interviewee really could answer that, but it makes you wonder, because right now we got 37.7 million people globally living with HIV. Actually, in 2020, that was the number, 37.7 million. And 28.2 million getting that antiretroviral therapy. It's kind of like a time bomb, Get HIV, something could happen, something couldn't, but you got to live with it. Every year, 1.5 million newly infected. But here's the big. There's still deaths. 680,000 in the world have died from AIDS-related illnesses in 2020. That's an estimate. It goes anywhere from 480 to 1 million. So they're saying 680,000. Okay, compared to COVID deaths in the U.S., 800,000 COVID deaths in the U.S., 680,000 to 1 million worldwide. Yeah, maybe you can live with that, huh? Do you think? You think that could be the normal, the new normal? Well, it's not a new normal. It's been going on since the 80s. But that's what we've been living with. Here's the kicker. 79.3 million. That's an estimate between 55.9 million and 110 million. Since the start of the epidemic, that's how many people had HIV. 79.3 million. Do you think it could have been nice if they had a vaccine at some point to get that 79.3 million down to like maybe 30 million? Maybe I'd be able to live with that. I mean, we're talking about World AIDS Day because this is the time we talk about it. It's also a time where we're also talking about Michigan and Omicron, and we're going to talk about abortion in a second. But my goodness, 79.3 million dead, or excuse me, infected since the start of the epidemic. Now, here's the dead. 36.3 million have died from AIDS-related illnesses since the start of the epidemic. 36 million. This is from the UN. This is why World AIDS Day, you got to at least stop yourself and say, okay, I got it. 36.3, I got it. That's important. That's no small thing. 36.3 million dead since 81. How many friends? How many friends do you have? I mean, people you know. I know for a lot of people, they didn't know anyone who died of AIDS until, and I know this too because I was working at that station in San Francisco, not until Rock Hudson died. When Rock Hudson died, people said, oh, now I know someone who died of AIDS. Just like, I mean, you can see it repeat throughout all the different epidemics. Oh, now I know someone who's died of COVID-19, right? I mean, with me, it happened with specifically COVID-19. My friend Corky Lee, last January 2020, or 2021 rather, before there was a vaccine. Still think of Corky. I mean, he was kind of, I don't want to say a partner in crime, but as an Asian American journalist, Corky was my buddy who would spur me on and say, keep going. So he was my first COVID-19 death that I really knew personally. And I'm just relating it back to AIDS. Once Rock Hudson died, and that became the big news, my goodness, now everyone knew. And so we mentioned World AIDS Day, but the kicker, if you go to the PETA podcast, wherever you podcast, the purple button on your iPhone, get it on iTunes, get it on Spotify. Get it on iHeartRadio. Get it wherever you podcast. You can understand the significance of World AIDS Day and why they haven't had a vaccine developed. Because we've developed vaccines for COVID just like that. Why? Because protocols were changed and they put it on a fast track. And so now, by February and March, we had vaccines. About a year, a little more than a year. It didn't help my friend Corky, like I said. But look, we've got 50, 60%, 70% vaccinated in the U.S., depending upon where you live. We got to do better. But why haven't we gotten an AIDS vaccine? That's the question on World AIDS Day. And the question is easily answered. Because we're looking for the wrong AIDS. We're looking at monkeys. And I just talked about, 37 million AIDS patients or AIDS deaths since the start of the pandemic or the epidemic. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dead monkeys. Dead monkeys who were either induced and infected, were treated to try to find this vaccine, this incredible holy grail of a vaccine that would at least be the key preventive tool to fight AIDS, HIV/AIDS. We, the researchers, have killed hundreds of thousands of monkeys. And still, after nearly 40 years, no vaccine. No vaccine. So let's, wear our red ribbons and think about the 36, 37 million people who have died from AIDS-related illnesses since the start of the pandemic. That's serious. But let's also think about how NIH, and I'm talking specifically Dr. Anthony Fauci, what have they done to produce a vaccine for HIV/AIDS? Zero. Or they produce no vaccine. But as I said, 37 million have died and hundreds of thousands of monkeys in futile experiments have died. That's what World AIDS Day should make you think about. And how there are still people today, another 37.7 million living with HIV today, or the numbers were from 2020. How do we make their lives better? This is globally, 37.7 million. We could develop a vaccine. Prevent it from passing on to more people. It's urgent. And we could stop spending money, like the billions of dollars, 5 billion maybe in the last 40 years. Oh, maybe that's not that much. Oh, maybe it could make a difference if you put it into something that works. I'm not into monkeys because, we're not trying to solve monkey AIDS. We have solved monkey AIDS. We've got to solve human AIDS. The H in HIV is for human. And the illogic of the science is boggling. You're not going to solve human AIDS with monkeys. Finally, I think they're getting around to that after nearly 40 years. And if you go to the PETA podcast, there's a bit on the Research Modernization Act that PETA has proposed. They're taking it seriously in Europe. They should take it seriously in the United States. And I mention this because, Well, there's the good Dr. Chu in San Francisco at UCSF who helped find the first Omicron person in San Francisco. Well, a lot of Asian Americans, researchers, and they should know the value of changing things up after 40 years if the goal is to try to find a vaccine for AIDS. Just some World AIDS Day thoughts for you to consider. I just was struck by the irony of seeing Dr. Anthony Fauci giving his press conference saying, well, we got this man coming from South Africa, flew into San Francisco, giving that press conference today on World AIDS Day. And I had this flashback like, oh my God, I remember going to a Fauci conference in San Francisco in the 80s where he was talking about AIDS. We're no closer to solving COVID and no closer to solving AIDS. But people are making money. The pharmaceutical companies on those retroviral therapies, the cocktails, they're making money. And like I said, the line of questioning I was getting at in the PETA podcast, if you go to that, was, isn't it kind of demotivating? You're spending all this money on, what is really the value of getting the vaccine now at this point? Well, the vaccine is, the point is you do a heck of a lot for mankind, for the world. Not just the U.S., the world. That's why it's important. All right. World AIDS Day. I wanted to talk about abortion because it was like the big thing today. Man, I can't believe it, but it looks like all those people are saying, oh, Roe is dead. Roe is a goner. I think they might be right. I just get that sense from listening to oral arguments today. And wouldn't you know, though, there were some thoughts out there. The liberal justices went to bat and said, hey, wait a minute. If you haven't caught up with this, Mississippi has a very, very harsh abortion law. It's been stopped, thrown out. They've gone to the Supreme Court and said, look, you cannot stop this abortion law. It's a 2018 law. It says you can't have an abortion after 15 weeks. That's viability, 15 weeks. Well, 15 weeks, a lot happens in 15 weeks. I mean, it really, that's kind of the issue. 15 weeks. And of course, we have a conservative set of judges now. 6 of them could vote to uphold this Mississippi law. And this Mississippi law, the only thing stopping this Mississippi law has been Roe v. Wade, which gives a woman the right to choose. Roe v. Wade, which is like 50 years old. There's the Casey Planned Parenthood case, which is 30 years old, which upheld Roe. And you'd think by now it's settled law. You'd think it's settled. Abortion is a settled thing, right? I mean, everyone gets a right to choose. If you want an abortion, it's your right. Well, Mississippi's coming up and saying, no. In our state, 15 weeks, 2018, they tried to get this through. They were stopped. Now it's at the Supreme Court. And now, suddenly, they've got a court that backs them up. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Coney Barrett. They look like they could do it. So, thank goodness we got people like liberal judge Stephen Breyer, who kind of pointed to what's really at stake here. Stephen, here's a quote from Judge Stephen Breyer, Lowell High School grad, incidentally.
To overrule under fire in the absence of the most compelling reason to re-examine a watershed decision would subvert the court's legitimacy beyond any serious question.
So besides messing up on legitimacy, now I love Stephen Breyer. Go Lowell, my alma mater, San Francisco. But he's right. To get the Mississippi law through, you got to overturn Roe. And did we hear anything about Roe? Did we hear anything about the law that says, oh, let's overturn it? That's a bad law. No, we're just saying Mississippi wants to do it. But Roe is like a big rock in the way. Let's just move the rock. Oh, well, wait, don't we want to talk about why that rock is there? You know, maybe to give the right to women to have an... No, let's move that rock. And, you know, we have just the court that's willing to move that rock, which is why it's, thank goodness for Sotomayor, because she put it bluntly to the court what it's about to do if they overturn precedents like Roe, established 50 years ago, Casey, established 30 years ago. This is what's at stake. Here's Sotomayor.
Right to control her own
body.
The right of a woman to choose, the right to control her own body has been clearly set for since Casey and never challenged.
Never challenged. This is the precedent. Never challenged. So now, because of Mississippi, they want to do something that is considered unconstitutional based on precedent. You're going to allow them just to push that away and say, yeah, go ahead, Mississippi. This is the weird thing. That, I mean, when you think about it, you say, God, we can't let that happen, right? More Sotomayor.
You want us to reject that line of viability and adopt something different. 15 justices over 50 years have, or I should say 30 since Casey, have reaffirmed that basic viability line. 4 have said no, 2 of them members of this court, but 15 justices have said yes, of varying political backgrounds. Will this institution survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts?
And that's really what's at stake here. If we hold our democracy up as something sacred, if we think that the Constitution matters, that it's a living document, and that the founders, you know, have their hearts beating with it, and everyone who is under our democracy is included here, if we suddenly say, oh, precedent doesn't matter, if we just move away they're not even challenging the precedents that said this is the law, that said, you know, Casey's the law, that said Roe is the law. We're just saying, look, these are inconveniences for Mississippi. Let's just move it out, because now we have 6 votes, 6 conservative votes. And that's what Sotomayor is trying to get at, that the 6 votes. She said, I mean, what a line, right? Will this institution survive the stench? Meaning we're talking smell-o-vision now, if you're looking at me. We're talking, yeah, this smells bad. Will we survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts? It shouldn't be. The Constitution should be, this is democracy. And the judges are set up to interpret that democracy, or interpret the Constitution. But, no one votes for them. They're above it all. They're above the fray. And now what we're saying is, got 6 votes. Things have changed. Law's going to change. What's right is now wrong. What's wrong is now right. Is that the democracy you want? We'll be talking about this for a while. I don't know when SCOTUS is going to rule, the Supreme Court of the U.S. But that's the issue. And, there was no arguments against Casey or no arguments against Roe. Just throw it out. And Breyer, you heard Breyer say, do we really want to do that with precedents? And then you heard Sotomayor said, or are we going to survive the stench that, reading the Constitution is a political act? This is the sacred document of our democracy. It kind of hit me when I was just following the news that of all the threats to our democracy, this is as significant a one. So if you're not out there with a sign or doing something, I don't know what you can do. There are people out there in front of the court. But it seems like, as I said earlier, it's hard to believe that Roe is going to be overturned. But if the 6 on the Supreme Court, the 6 conservatives have their way, it looks like it's going to be a 6-3 tyranny. And then Mississippi will have its law. And we've talked about this also. California is already anticipating that it may become a tourist destination for abortions. Because if abortion is legal in California, they're set up for a new industry, a California abortion industry. Now, of course, that's probably going to engender a certain amount of protests saying, oh, we don't need an abortion industry here. And then some people say, well, we need the right. Well, this is the new reality. Abortion as states' rights issue. Each and every state will have their own laws, and you'll have to, well, let's see, where am I going to have my abortion? I can go to California or I can go to Iowa. I'll go to California. I can go to, can't have it in Texas. Can't have it in Iowa. Likely not in Iowa. It's going to be crazy if Roe is overturned. And like I said, 50 years, a half century, and it's not settled. That means anything. Anything. Let's see. What has been 50 years as law and could be threatened? Oh, our civil rights. Just to throw something out there. 1964 civil rights. Yeah, 50 years after. How about voting rights? We know maybe this shows us that 50 years that's 2 generations. It takes 2 generations to undo justice. So we go one way, 2 generations, then we go the other way. Oh God. And one of those generations is going to coincide with climate change, and that's going to be terrible. You're going to have bad air and bad laws. Terrible. Terrible. So that's kind of the way it looks. It looked like Kavanaugh was talking about, Supreme Court should be in the business of deciding who gets an abortion. No, but it should be in the business of deciding what is settled law. And after 50 years, as Sotomayor points out, Roe and Casey have settled the law. But it seems like once again, in the world of love, in the world of fear, the world of fear is losing out or winning out, and the world of love is losing out. Okay, this is so much stuff today. I mean, and little stuff, like little stuff that I wanted to share with you, because it's a good news thing for Asian Americans. Here's something in the Times today. The Metropolitan Museum of Art on Tuesday announced it had finally secured a lead donation of $125 million, the largest capital gift in its history, from its longtime trustee Oscar Tang and his wife Agnes Sue Tang, an archaeologist and art historian. They will have a wing named after them for a minimum of 50 years. So the Tang or the Sue Tang or the Oscar Tang, the O Tang, is the O Tang wing? Thank you to the Tangs. I mean, I love the Met. I don't go there as often because I haven't been to New York as much in the last, say, 5-10 years. But I've been to the Met. I love it. And a record $125 million donation. It's great. A good news for Asian Americans. Here's I mentioned the other gun thing we were talking about in Michigan, the gun law. The law that limits gun rounds is upheld in California. It's a federal appeals court. Restored California's prohibition on high-capacity magazines, a decision with national implications that could also lead to the reinstatement of a state ban on semi-automatic weapons. It was a 7-4 vote. U.S. Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit, once again, doing its thing. Thank goodness for that. Asian American news. Now, you may have seen this yesterday. Tiger Woods was on TV saying he's done. I mean, he's a broken man. Not morally, just physically. Like, Tiger's still a hero. He's not perfect. But when he went before the cameras, I mean, it's been 9 months since he had that accident where he rolled over. And it was clearly, it was associated with speed. But he's done. Now he's got his son to look forward to, and maybe he can start doing something with all his money. I mean, I'm sure he thinks he is, but maybe do something more. But he was the Asian American man of the hour for so long until his fall from grace. And even then, he came back a little bit. And then the crash, when it looked like he was coming back. Like, it's tough to be a golfer. I mean, I have tried. I have tried. It's tough. A couple of other things here. Oh, Dave Leonard in the New York Times, in trial for Arbery killing, a strategic choice to downplay race. Something I wrote about in my column. Check it out on the ALDEF blog, aaldef.org/blog. And a couple other things. Oh, I should mention, this is a key day if you're a baseball fan. If you're a baseball fan, the owners who are in this negotiating committee with the Baseball Players Association, they're meeting. They've got until later today to figure out what the heck to do. And if they don't figure it out, there's probably going to be a lockout. And if there's a lockout, it might be a good thing because, number one, you still have the pandemic. Number two, my team is not signing all the good players that it should. And it's letting a lot of good players that it had get away. I don't know why. Why can't they? But anyway, I just think that it's terrible that Baseball is an $11 billion industry. $11 billion. And it's not enough to satisfy everyone's greed. And then, of course, one of the reasons why I stopped going is because when I stopped covering the games as a news event and I had to start paying, and gladly, tickets are expensive. And for a while, I did own season tickets when the Giants were good. They were good seats, not great seats, but I could see the plate, got to know. It was great being a season ticket holder for the great years. 2012, 14, 2011. But I don't know. We still have Belt. We still have Crawford for the Giants, but Posey's gone. That is, Posey was kind of a strange guy. I mean, at least in terms of how I saw him. But he was a kind of a stable guy, stable, conservative, and so he was solid. He wasn't the home run hitter we thought he would be, but he was solid. Anyway, I just, it gets to the point when, though, it's all about money. I mean, players averaging $9, $10, $15 million. I mean, my goodness. Scherzer getting like 35, 40 million a year. Max Scherzer in New York paying for all the best players. I'm becoming a free agent fan. I just follow the players I like and respect. That's it. Teams, forget the teams. It would be good to have games. I'm not going to be affected by a lockout unless it affects games. And if it affects games, then forget it. And I'll just watch whatever's out there. We've lived through it. I hope they get it together, but we'll see. Then I'll chime in and tell you what I think they should do. What else? Oh, the Warriors lost yesterday. I know it was bad. Steph Curry had a real terrible game. Wasn't shooting, but the other team had lost their best player, their best shooter. They still had Chris Paul, still had some tall, fast defensive players. But what they were doing is they were hand checking Curry. They were guarding him. They were doing a defensive job on Curry. So we'll see what happens. Steph Curry is not going to go, shoot abysmally in a 7-game series. And certainly if they play again, it'll probably be a different situation. The Warriors are going to get back Klay Thompson. That's going to help. They're going to get back James Wiseman. That's going to help. And I think yesterday's loss to the Phoenix Suns was kind of a wake-up call. But an interesting game, but it's still so early, right? Less than 20, 30 games. 18, about 20 games into the season. The real season begins playoff time. But it's clear the Suns are for real, and the Suns and the Warriors are going to go. They're going to be at it all year. All right. Hey, look, my wife keeps telling me that I shouldn't be talking this long, but I thank you. I thank you for joining us. We've covered almost everything that I wanted to talk about. This is, as I said, the micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAXs. Thank you for being here. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific. We do it because, hey, career news guy, got to talk about the news. I'll help you put the news into perspective, how to look at the news if you want. And you can come back and chat at me and say, well, Emil, I don't really agree with you. You can see these videos on amok.com. I post them there. Go to Twitter at Emil Amok and use the technology that Jack Dorsey left us with. We'll see if that Agrawal guy can give us a little better viewer for video on Twitter. Read my column, of course, on the ALDEF blog, Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, aldef.org/blog. You know, I just like to say, be here, bang the gong now. EmilGuillermo.media on Facebook. We're on YouTube at Emil Guillermo, very fledgling YouTube site. I don't even call myself a YouTuber. I'm just a tuber. There's like 3 people on there. Go to amok.com for replays. And don't forget the PETA podcast. If you go to the PETA podcast, you can get my interview with Lisa Jones-Engel, who is a researcher, a scientist now with PETA, talking about why monkeys are a bad medium to find a vaccine for AIDS. The proof is in the monkey. They're monkeys. They're not going to give us a human vaccine. So, that be it. And you know, you can always email me at emil@amok.com. Those of you who are regular listeners of this show, you know, when you get to this point, you know, Emil is at that point where he's ready to say, are you feeling bad? Just isolate what's making you feel bad and just really acknowledge it and say, yeah, and then ask questions. Say, is it real? It's not real. And then know that if you feel shame, or if you feel like you're not worthy, or if you feel somehow not right, like you don't belong, give yourself an elbow hug. You belong. You're worthy. You can do it. Pause. And don't continue to feel bad, but pause. Make it right. And just remember this. As I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. And may you live with ease. Till next time. Emil Guillermo here. Mahal Kita.